The phone rang just as I was putting my tools away in an old drawer on the workbench. My hands automatically reached for the receiver, even though the calls had been rare lately. Nicholas's voice sounded unexpectedly cheerful, almost festive, which alerted me immediately. "Dad, how are you? I was thinking, why don't we meet tonight? We'll have dinner at the restaurant, have a heart-to-heart. It's been a long time since we've seen each other properly." I put the wrench away and leaned against the garage wall, feeling the tension leave my shoulders. A fine October rain drizzled outside the dirty window, turning the autumn evening into a blurry gray watercolor. Nicholas spoke quickly, as if he were afraid of changing his mind or someone was rushing him to end this conversation. "At the restaurant?" I asked, not hiding my surprise. "What's the occasion? Is everything all right?" "There's no special occasion. I just wanted to see my father and talk about this and that. You know the Golden Horseshoe on Main Street, don't you? Why don't you meet me there at 7 o'clock? I've already made reservations for everyone." There was an unnatural strain in his voice, as if he were reading from a prepared text. But I didn't pay attention to it and didn't go into details. It was the first invitation from my son in the last few months, and it would be foolish of me to refuse. "Of course, I'll definitely come. Thanks for thinking of me, son." "Great, I'll see you then." "See you later, Dad." "See you, Nicholas." After a short but unexpectedly pleasant conversation, I hung up the phone and stood in the semi-darkness of the garage for a long time, looking at the old yellowed blueprints on the wall. Once upon a time, at this very worn workbench, the late Martha and I had planned regular home repairs, discussed family weekend plans and long-term dreams, and little Nicholas had regularly brought broken toys here and asked his grandfather to fix them. Now that boy is grown, educated, a respected veterinarian, with a family and children of his own, and I've quietly become a person you see only on special occasions, and not too often. My dear Martha died 3 years ago on a frosty February morning after a long illness, and since then something important and irreversible had broken in the once strong relationship with my only son. It didn't happen all at once, of course. During the first difficult months after the funeral, Nicholas called me faithfully every week, came over on weekends with his family, and genuinely helped me with household chores and paperwork. He even seriously suggested several times that I sell the house and move in with them, but I flatly refused. Too eager to stay in these walls where there were so many happy years of life together with his mother, where every corner kept dear memories of our family. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, the calls became less and less frequent, and the visits became shorter and more formal. Clarissa almost always found very good reasons why they had to rush home. 13-year-old Alex had an important Sunday league soccer practice. 10-year-old Emma had an important choir rehearsal, or Clarissa herself had a work emergency that could not be postponed. Gradually, as the facts came together, I bitterly realized that I had become an inconvenient reminder of a past from which the energetic young family clearly preferred to keep a safe distance. Climbing the creaky steps into the house, I turned on the bright light in the hallway and looked at myself critically in the old wooden frame mirror. 72 years old, and I looked, frankly speaking, still quite strong and vigorous. His back was still straight, his shoulders still broad, his arms still strong and skillful, and his eyes still had the vivacity and energy that had once pleased young Martha so much. I always cut my gray hair short and kept my beard neatly trimmed. There was nothing decrepit or old, though Clarissa looked at me as if I had been in the grave for a long time. It took much longer than it reasonably should have to choose the right clothes for dinner at the restaurant. Martha had always been a natural and easy person to help me with such mundane things. She knew exactly what was best for the occasion. After carefully going through several possible options, I finally settled on my favorite dark blue sweater and quality gray pants. Nothing flashy or inappropriate, but not too mournful, depressing a look either. In the pocket of my warm jacket, I already had the keys to my old but reliable pickup truck, which had served me well for 12 years. All the way to the center of town, I wondered what it was that could have made Nicholas call me out of the blue and invite me over today. In recent months, our infrequent phone conversations had invariably been limited to routine questions about his health and the briefest possible reports on his grandchildren's school progress. Perhaps they had some serious family problems that required the advice of the older generation? Or on the contrary, there was long-awaited good news which you want to sincerely share with your loved ones? Or maybe, which seemed particularly unlikely to me, Clarissa had finally matured and decided to truly establish normal human relations with her father-in-law. The last thought seemed fantastical, but I wanted to believe in the best. Golden Horseshoe was located in the very historical center of Frostburg, in a solid old brick building, which had survived and remembered the pre-war times. The restaurant had long enjoyed well-deserved popularity among the locals. The prices here were not painfully high, the cuisine was consistently at a good level, and the general atmosphere was just right for leisurely, heartfelt conversations over a glass of wine. I parked next to Nicholas's familiar silver Jeep and checked the time on my wristwatch. It was exactly 5 to 7. Pedantic precision was one of my old, ineradicable habits from my long-distance Navy service as a young man. The massive front door of the restaurant was festively decorated with a large wreath of bright autumn leaves of all imaginable colors. Inside, there was a homely, warm, extremely cozy atmosphere. Soft, dim light, barely audible background music, delicious, appetizing smells of freshly cooked roasted meat and exquisite spicy spices. Regular families with children of different ages, young couples in love, noisy companies of old friends were sitting peacefully at neatly arranged tables. The most usual measured evening life of the most usual American provincial town, of which I was an active and full-fledged part not so long ago. Now, for some reason, I felt more like an occasional guest at someone else's merry celebration of life. A pretty young hostess of about 25 with a professionally friendly smile politely asked me if I had a reservation. "The reservation is under the name Vine Hill," I replied, trying to speak as confidently and calmly as possible. She quickly ran her elegant finger down the long list on the electronic tablet and nodded understandingly. "Yes, of course, that's right. Your family's already waiting for you at the table. If you'd be so kind as to follow me, I'd be happy to show you out." Your family. So Nicholas really didn't come here alone, as I'd suspected. Rather, he'd brought both of his children with him. And that happy thought warmed my heart far more than I'd reasonably expected from such a small thing. Alex and Emma had always been genuinely excited to see their grandfather, despite their mother's frankly disapproving looks. Maybe today they would finally be able to have a normal conversation with their grandchildren, to learn details about their school affairs, to find out what they were doing lately, what their plans and dreams were. The hostess confidently led me through the spacious hall to the far corner, where at the large panoramic window stood a round table covered with an impeccably white starched tablecloth. There indeed sat Nicholas's entire family, he himself, Clarissa, and the two children. My son immediately rose to meet me, extending his hand for the traditional handshake. The same unnatural tautness that had been present in the recent phone conversation was evident in his cautious movements. "Hey, Dad, how was your trip? Any traffic?" "It was fine, son. Thanks for having me over." I gave him a firm handshake and looked around at the rest of the family. Clarissa sat across from me, elegantly dressed in a dark green suit that was clearly expensive. Her brown hair was immaculately styled, and her makeup looked professional and expensive. She nodded slightly at my arrival, not even bothering to get up from the table or smile. Her lips were tightly pressed together, and in her cold gray-blue eyes I could see the irritation she was hiding. "Hello, Clarissa. You look beautiful." "Good evening, Zach," she replied dryly, not even trying to make her voice sound warm. The children, on the other hand, reacted very differently. 13-year-old Alex, a tall boy for his age with dark curly hair inherited from his father, smiled broadly and waved at me. "Hi, Grandpa. Haven't seen you in a while." 10-year-old Emma, a fragile blonde girl with big, expressive brown eyes, jumped out of her chair and rushed into my arms. "Grandpa Zach, we missed you so much." I hugged my granddaughter tightly, feeling the warmth spilling over my chest. Moments like this were definitely worth enduring Clarissa's coldness and the awkwardness of the whole situation. "And I've missed you, little one. You've grown up so much, and Alex has become a real man, too." "Sit down, Dad," Nicholas said hastily, pointing to the empty chair next to him. "We haven't ordered yet. We were waiting for you." I settled down at the table, trying to ignore Clarissa's defiantly aloof posture. She turned her back to the window, feigning deep interest in the rain-soaked streets of Frostburg. The waitress, an attractive middle-aged woman in a black uniform blouse, immediately came to our table with a menu and an order pad. "Good evening. What will you have to drink?" "I'll have a red wine, please," Nicholas said. "A glass of house wine. Mineral water without gas," Clarissa said coldly, not taking her eyes off the window. And a Coke for me, Emma exclaimed happily. Coke for me too, Alex supported her. Light beer if you have it, I added. While the waitress was writing down our drink order, I tried to make a casual conversation with my grandchildren, who were always a source of sincere joy in my gradually emptying life. So tell me, how's school going? Alex, how's soccer going? And Emma, are you still in choir? I'm doing great at soccer, Alex answered enthusiastically. We're in second place in the district championship. Coach says I have a good chance of making the varsity team next year. And I'm singing the lead in the Christmas concert. Not wanting to be left behind, Emma added. Miss Johnson said I have a very beautiful voice. That's wonderful. I will definitely come to your concert if you invite me. Clarissa suddenly intervened, turning from the window and looking directly at me for the first time all evening. There was something unpleasant in her gaze. The concert will be on a weekday, during business hours. It's hardly worth planning. An awkward pause hung over the table. The children instinctively sensed the tension and fell silent, dropping their eyes to their plates. Nicholas nervously twirled his napkin in his hands, obviously trying to think of a way to smooth over the awkwardness of the moment. Clarissa, Dad's retired, and he's got a free schedule, he said cautiously. Oh, yes, of course. I forgot, she replied with a poorly concealed sneer. I decided not to respond to the provocation and instead focused on the menu. The waitress, meanwhile, brought the drinks and waited patiently for our orders. The Golden Horseshoe was known for its excellent meat dishes, and I chose a medium-rare steak with a vegetable side dish. Nicholas ordered salmon, the kids ordered pizza for two, and Clarissa had a light salad. Aren't you very hungry? I asked, trying to establish some semblance of normal communication. I'm watching my figure, she said briefly. Unlike some people, I can't afford to eat anything. That was a little rude. Nicholas blushed and quickly looked at his wife with obvious reproach. Clarissa? Clarissa what? I'm just stating a fact. The children fell silent again, sensing the growing tension between the adults. Alex rubbed the edge of the tablecloth nervously, and Emma shifted her gaze anxiously from her mother to her grandfather. I felt sorry for the children, who obviously didn't understand why their mother was being so unfriendly to their grandfather. Tell me about your work, I said to Nicholas, trying to keep the conversation on a safer footing. How are things going at the clinic? Nicholas perked up, grateful for the opportunity to change the subject. It's not bad. Last week I operated on a Dalmatian with a compound leg fracture. The owners were very worried, but everything went well. Now the dog is already running around like nothing happened. That's great. You've always loved animals since you were a kid, remember? You used to bring home all kinds of wounded birds and kittens. Yes, my mother always let me treat them, Nicholas remembered warmly. She said it was good for developing a sense of responsibility. Clarissa tensed visibly at the mention of the late Martha. She obviously did not like to talk about her mother-in-law, who had been wary of her daughter-in-law during her lifetime, intuitively sensing her insincerity. Your mother allowed a lot of things, Clarissa said dryly, sometimes too much. It was a direct attack on Martha's memory, and I felt anger begin to rise in my chest. But I held back for the sake of the children and remained outwardly calm. Martha was a wonderful wife and mother, I said evenly. Nicholas grew up to be a good man, thanks in large part to her upbringing. Of course, Clarissa gritted her teeth, clearly not trying to hide her irritation. The waitress brought the entrees and we ate in a long silence for a while. The kids quickly finished their pizza and asked permission to go to the arcade in the far corner of the restaurant. Clarissa nodded and they ran off, clearly delighted at the opportunity to escape the tense atmosphere of the adult table. Left to ourselves, the three of us continued eating in awkward silence. Nicholas made occasional tentative attempts at conversation, but they were quickly stifled by his wife's icy stare. Clarissa defiantly took out her cell phone and started typing something, showing with all her appearance that she was not interested in her father-in-law's presence at all. I tried to break through this wall of silence and misunderstanding by asking my son about his plans for the coming months. Work has always been a safe topic of conversation, especially when it came to the profession of veterinarian, which Nicholas was sincerely passionate about since childhood. What's new at the clinic? You were going to expand, buy new equipment for surgery? Nicholas gratefully grasped the proposed topic, visibly revitalized. In his eyes appeared the same enthusiasm that always lit up when talking about his favorite business. Yes, we finally agreed with the suppliers to buy a modern X-ray machine. It's a digital system. We'll be able to take pictures in real time. This will seriously simplify the diagnosis of fractures and internal injuries, especially in small animals where every minute counts. Sounds impressive. Did it cost a lot? Not cheap, of course, but we took out a loan on favorable terms. I think it'll pay for itself pretty quickly. There is only one clinic in the city that has such equipment, and the demand is growing constantly. I listened with pleasure to my son's story about his professional successes and plans. Nicholas has always been smart and purposeful, and his career has been more than successful. At times like these, I felt especially proud of him, despite all our recent difficulties in our relationship. And the staff? Did you find a good assistant? Yes, Jennifer came in last month, fresh out of veterinary school. She's a very bright. She's a very bright girl. She's a fast learner. The animals love her. That's important. Some doctors are technically proficient, but can't relate to their patients. Clarissa suddenly raised her head from the phone and intervened in the conversation with poorly concealed irritation in her voice. Jennifer, she's all you talk about lately. 22 years old, blonde, honors degree, very convenient. Nicholas was embarrassed and blushed, clearly not expecting this turn of conversation. Clarissa, what do you mean? Jennifer's just a good professional, nothing more. Of course, all men say that, she smiled sarcastically, especially when it comes to young blondes with long legs. The atmosphere at the table instantly became heated. I felt extremely uncomfortable, having unwittingly witnessed a family scene of jealousy. The children at the slot machines, fortunately, did not hear this conversation. Clarissa, please, not in front of your father, Nicholas asked quietly. What's the big deal? Let him know who he's dealing with, she turned to me with a cold smile. Zach, are you aware that your son is now working until 9 o'clock at night? Of course, it's strictly for business reasons. I didn't know what to say to that accusation. It wasn't wise to get involved in a family dispute, but it was becoming impossible to keep silent. I think Nicholas is old enough to manage his own time, I said carefully. Oh, so you support him? I'm not surprised. Male solidarity above all else. Clarissa took a sip of her mineral water and turned back to her phone, showing that the conversation was over for her. Nicholas looked upset and embarrassed. Dad, don't mind him. Clarissa is going through a rough patch at work. Lots of stress. Don't take it out on work, his wife said coldly, not lifting her eyes from the screen. It had nothing to do with work. I decided to change the subject and tried to talk about my own affairs, hoping to lighten the mood. I have some news too, by the way. Remember neighbor Thompson's old boat? He asked me to help him fix the engine. Interesting work. Reminds me of the old days. Isn't it? Nicholas raised an interested eyebrow. What's wrong with the engine? Problems with the cooling system. The pump was worn out, plus the ducts in the cylinder block were clogged. Had to take it almost completely apart. But it's running like new now. Clarissa looked up and interrupted my story. Excuse me, but why would a 70-year-old man dig into dirty engines? Isn't there anything better for a retired man to do? Her tone was openly dismissive, and I felt a prick of irritation. But I tried to answer calmly. I like working with my hands. It keeps me in shape and makes me feel useful. Useful? She grinned. Useful to whom? Thompson could hire a proper handyman, and you should find something age-appropriate to do. Clarissa! Nicholas raised his voice, clearly angered by his wife's rudeness. Clarissa again? I'm telling the truth. At 72, people are usually gardening or reading books, not climbing under hoods. She paused deliberately between sentences, relishing the opportunity to humiliate me. There was a nasty glint in her eyes. She was clearly enjoying this verbal duel. Maybe you should consider a nursing home. There are a lot of interesting people your age, organized leisure, medical supervision. It was already an open attack, and I barely restrained myself from replying sharply. Nicholas turned pale and grabbed the edge of the table. Clarissa, stop this right now. You're out of line. What boundaries? I'm just making reasonable suggestions. Can't we discuss practical matters? That's not discussion. That's rudeness. The son was really angry. Clarissa shrugged her shoulders, feigning innocence. Hmm. If concern for the safety of the elderly is called boorishness, so be it. But someone has to think about reality. I tried to take the initiative and change the topic of conversation again, although the mood was already thoroughly spoiled. Nicholas, how are the kids learning? Is Alex doing well in math? My son was relieved to have a safe topic. Generally well. Algebra is a little difficult, but we've hired a tutor. He's doing great in physics, though. That's great. Maybe he inherited his engineering skills from his grandfather. I tried to smile. Clarissa immediately intervened with a venomous comment. I hope not. One loser in the family is enough. The silence that followed those words was deafening. Nicholas opened his mouth but couldn't find anything to say. I sat still, digesting what I'd heard. Clarissa continued eating her salad as if nothing had happened. Mommy! Emma's voice suddenly came from across the table. Can we play some more games? There's a new game with motorcycles. Of course, little girl, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Just be careful you don't fall. Emma nodded and ran back to the machines. Clarissa gave her a glance, then turned to me. Speaking of children, you shouldn't spoil them with play money. They already have everything, and excess spoils character. A few dollars for fun won't make them spoiled children, I objected. Do you think so? I think children should learn to appreciate money and understand its value. But it's probably hard for you to understand that, given your life experience. Her voice sounded more and more aggressive with each phrase. It was obvious that she was deliberately provoking conflict, taking some perverse pleasure in the opportunity to humiliate the older man. Nicholas frantically searched for a way to diffuse the situation, but obviously could not cope with the situation. His wife was in complete control of the conversation, directing it in the direction she wanted. The waitress came to our table to ask if we needed anything else. Nicholas ordered a second glass of wine, clearly needing more support to cope with the tension that was building. I asked for another mug of beer, hoping the alcohol would help me tolerate my sister-in-law's barbs more easily. Clarissa defiantly refused any additional orders, continuing to play the suffering victim of circumstance. After the waitress left, I made another attempt at normal human conversation, turning to a topic that had always interested Clarissa, her career and work accomplishments. Clarissa, how are things going at your job? Nicholas tells me you have a new branch opening in a neighboring state. She slowly lifted her head from the phone and looked at me with ill-concealed irritation, as if my question was an inappropriate invasion of her privacy. Work is going on as it should. I don't think the details of my professional life are of any serious interest to you. Why not? I've always been interested in what our family members do. Our family, she grinned with undisguised sarcasm. That's a pretty bold statement on your part. Nicholas coughed nervously, trying to get his wife's attention and somehow smooth over the awkwardness of the situation. Clarissa, Dad is just showing polite interest. There's nothing wrong with that. Polite interest? She turned to her husband with a cold smile. I think it's an attempt to pry into matters that are none of his business. Her voice grew louder and louder, and I noticed that the customers at the neighboring tables began to sneak glances in our direction. An elderly couple sitting nearby were clearly listening to our conversation, trying not to make it too obvious. Clarissa, be quiet, please, Nicholas asked quietly. People are looking at us. Let them look, she answered without lowering her tone. Maybe then everyone would understand the problems I was having. I tried to take control of the situation and calm the conflict. Clarissa, if my presence bothers you so much, maybe I should leave. Exactly, finally a reasonable suggestion. She slammed her palm on the table, making the dishes bounce. I've been thinking about it for a while now. Several customers at neighboring tables turned their heads in our direction, not hiding their curiosity. The waiters also began to glance around, clearly concerned about what was happening. The atmosphere in the restaurant changed noticeably. The cheerful hum of conversation began to fade, giving way to tense anticipation. Nicholas turned pale and grabbed his wife's hand, trying to stop her. Clarice, stop it! What are you doing? I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago. She stood up abruptly from the table, knocking over a glass of mineral water. I can't take it anymore. The water spilled over the white tablecloth, but Clarissa didn't even notice it. Her face was red with anger, her eyes glittering with malice. She stood over the table, pointing at me with a finger, shaking with rage. You know what, Zach? I'm sick of pretending. I'm sick of pretending I'm happy to see you. I'm sick of pretending to be a happy family. Clarissa, please sit down, Nicholas said in a pleading voice. It's not Daddy's fault. Nothing? She laughed hysterically. It's his fault for poisoning our lives with his presence. It's his fault for constantly reminding us of a past we'd rather forget. The children, hearing their mother's voice, came running from the arcade. Alex and Emma stood at a loss, not realizing what was happening. Their faces expressed fear and bewilderment. Mom, what happened? Emma asked quietly. Nothing, little girl, nothing's wrong. I tried to reassure my granddaughter, but Clarissa immediately intervened. Don't you dare talk to my children, she shouted. You have no right to do that. By now the whole restaurant was watching our scene. Conversations at the other tables had practically stopped. The manager of the place, a middle-aged man in a strict suit, began to cautiously approach our table. Clarissa, you're scaring the children, Nicholas said, standing up and trying to hug his wife. Calm down, please. Don't touch me, she pushed her husband away. I've put up with this situation for years and I've had enough. I won't pretend to enjoy the company of this old man anymore. The word old man sounded so hateful that I shuddered. Clarissa obviously knew where to hit to inflict maximum pain. She was a master of psychological sadism. Mom, don't scream, please, Alex asked, moving closer to the table. Alex, Emma, go to the car, Clarissa ordered sharply. Immediately. But Mom, immediately, I said. The children obediently headed for the exit, casting sympathetic glances at me. I felt unbearably sorry for them. They were unwitting witnesses to this outrage. The manager finally approached our table, trying to keep his professional composure. Excuse me, but could you keep your voice down? It's disturbing the other customers. We were just leaving, Clarissa cut him off. There's nothing more to do here. She grabbed her purse and headed for the exit. But halfway out, she turned and threw one last venomous phrase in my direction. And anyway, Zach, think about your age. At 72, it's time to realize when you're not needed. These words echoed throughout the room. Several women at neighboring tables gasped in indignation. An elderly man sitting nearby shook his head in disapproval. Nicholas stood there, red with embarrassment, not knowing what to do. He tossed between the desire to follow his wife and the need to apologize to his father. Dad, forgive her, please. She didn't mean it. Go get your family, son, I said quietly. The children are waiting. But Dad, go on, Nicholas, it's all right. He nodded uncertainly, put the dinner money on the table, and headed out. I was left sitting at the table alone, under the curious stares of the other diners. The waitress cautiously approached and began to clean up the spilled water, looking at me sympathetically. Can I get you another beer? She asked quietly. No thanks, I'll go too. I finished the rest of my beer and got up from the table. Conversations were gradually resuming in the room, but I could still feel the interested stares. The manager came up to me and apologized for the unpleasant situation. Don't be, I replied. Family matters can be complicated. As I left the restaurant, I saw Nicholas and his family getting into the car. Clarissa defiantly turned away when she saw me in the doorway. The kids waved at me from the car window. Their upset faces were the last thing I saw before the Jeep disappeared into the evening traffic. The rain intensified, turning the October evening into a dreary and dank ordeal. I stood under the awning of the restaurant, reflecting on what had just happened and trying to understand how the situation had gotten to this extreme. Standing under the awning of the restaurant and looking at the empty street where my son's car had just disappeared, I involuntarily recalled Clarissa's words that at 72, it's time to realize when you're not needed. Those words lodged deep in my soul, like a splinter that couldn't be removed. But what struck me most of all was the hatred with which she said them. It was as if I were her personal enemy, not her father-in-law, who had never done anything bad to her. The rain drummed on the pavement with a measured rhythm, creating the sad melody of an October evening. I pulled out my car keys, but I was in no hurry to get behind the wheel. I wanted to stand in silence for a while, to try to make sense of what had happened and to understand how a family dinner had turned into a public humiliation. Deep down, I'd always known Clarissa didn't like me. It had been there from the very beginning, back when Nicholas had first introduced us to his future daughter-in-law. Then 5 years ago, she had been more restrained in showing her dislike, hiding her true feelings behind a mask of politeness. Martha had noticed that there was something insincere about the girl, but I put it down to my mother-in-law's natural wariness toward the one who was taking her son away from her. My late wife was right. Martha had an amazing intuition about people, able to read characters at a glance. "There's a coldness about her that bothers me," she said after her first meetings with Clarissa. "She's too calculating for her age and looks upon us as a temporary nuisance." I thought then that my wife was exaggerating, that jealousy of her daughter-in-law was clouding her eyes. Now, standing in the rain outside the restaurant after the public scandal, I realized how accurate her observations were. Clarissa really did see us as a nuisance, an obstacle to the life she had planned for herself. Finally getting into the truck, I turned on the engine and drove slowly out onto the wet street. The wipers were rhythmically scrubbing the drops off the windshield, but it wasn't easy to get rid of the intrusive thoughts, especially the memory of what had happened 3 weeks ago in Riverside. I was on my way back from the auto shop, where I'd bought parts for Thompson's boat. Riverside was a half-hour drive from Frostburg, and I decided to grab lunch at the local cafe, which was known for its excellent sandwiches. I parked near the Maple Leaf, a small, cozy establishment on the main street of the town. As I got out of the car, I happened to notice a familiar figure in the window of the cafe. Clarissa was sitting at a table across from a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, dark-haired, well-dressed, about 40 years old. They were talking animatedly about something, and it was clear from their postures, from the way she leaned across the table toward him, that this was not a business meeting. I stopped at the entrance, not knowing what to do. Should I go inside and say hello? Or would it be better to discreetly leave? While I was pondering, Clarissa suddenly laughed and put her hand on her companion's shoulder. The gesture was so intimate that I had no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Stepping discreetly away from the entrance, I got back into my car and drove away without saying anything. On the way home, I tried to find an innocent explanation for what I had seen. Maybe it was a coworker or an old friend, but deep down I realized I was fooling myself. What I had seen was a date in the classic sense of the word. For days I pondered whether I should tell Nicholas. On the one hand, my son had a right to know the truth about his wife's behavior. On the other hand, I had no absolute proof of the affair, only suspicions based on a scene I'd accidentally witnessed. Besides, interfering in family affairs could only aggravate the already complicated relationship. In the end, I decided to remain silent, hoping I was wrong in my assumptions. Maybe Clarissa did have a good reason for meeting a stranger in a neighboring town. Maybe I had misinterpreted their behavior. I wanted to believe the best, especially for the sake of the kids. But tonight showed Clarissa's true colors: her aggression, her unconcealed anger, her desire to publicly humiliate all of it, spoke of a woman who had long ago ceased to consider herself part of our family. Perhaps the meeting in Riverside was just one episode in a more complicated story that Nicholas didn't even know about. When I got home, I sat in the car in the driveway for a long time, looking at the familiar shape of my home. The yellow light in the windows seemed especially warm after the cold reception at the restaurant. Here, within these walls, no one called me superfluous. No one hinted at a nursing home or said I was interfering with my life. Once inside, I turned on the living room light and sank into Martha's favorite chair. Sometimes I thought I could still feel her presence in these rooms, hear her voice, feel the warmth of her care, especially at times like this, when the outside world became especially hostile and incomprehensible. Martha would never have let anyone treat me like that. She was a woman of character, able to stand up for her family. Clarissa would never have dared to do such a thing in front of her. Maybe that was why she hated to talk about her late mother-in-law, who had been a living reproach to her behavior. In the kitchen, I brewed strong tea and sat down at the table where Martha and I had spent thousands of evenings, discussing the day's work, making plans for the future, just enjoying each other's company. It seemed then that such a measured family life would go on forever. We did not think about the fact that one day one of us would be alone in this house. The phone rang about 10:30. I looked at the caller ID and it was Nicholas. He probably wanted to apologize for his wife's behavior, to explain her breakdown by stress or fatigue. But I wasn't ready for such conversations today. Let him deal with his own family problems first. The call stopped, but after a minute the phone rang again. Then it rang again. Nicholas obviously wanted to talk, but I didn't pick up the phone. Too many bitter words had been said today. Too many boundaries had been crossed. A simple apology couldn't make things right anymore. Around 11 o'clock, I finally went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind was replaying the scenes from the restaurant. Clarissa's angry face, the confused looks on the children's faces, Nicholas's helplessness. And then there was the image of the stranger from the Riverside Cafe, David, as I mentally called him, not knowing his real name. I wondered if Nicholas knew of this man's existence. Does he guess about his wife's secret meetings? Or is he as blind to her true nature as I have been all these years? Perhaps today's scandal was just the beginning, the first crack in the facade of well-being Clarissa had worked so hard to maintain. As I fell asleep to the sound of the rain outside my window, I thought about the fact that tomorrow might bring new revelations, and that sooner or later the truth about Clarissa would come out. Women like her can't play the role of perfect wife and mother for long. Sooner or later the mask falls off, and then everyone sees the true face of the person who for years deceived the closest people. I woke up the next day with a heavy head and an unpleasant aftertaste from yesterday's events. It was still drizzling rain outside the window, turning the morning into a gray continuation of a gray evening. My phone showed 8 missed calls from Nicholas, but I never called him back. I wasn't in the mood to listen to excuses and explanations. The day went by with the usual chores. I dismantled tools in the garage, read the newspaper, and cooked a simple dinner. Toward evening, the phone rang again. This time it was Clarissa herself, which surprised me to the extreme. In all the years I'd known her, she'd never called me personally. "Zach, it's Clarissa. We need to meet and talk." There was a strange note in her voice, not anger like yesterday, but a nervous insistence. "What do we need to talk about, Clarissa?" "I think you said what you thought yesterday. It's important. It's very important." Nicholas suggested that the three of us meet at the restaurant to clear the air. The same restaurant? I'm afraid we're not very welcome there after last night's performance. "No, a different one. The Golden Horseshoe. It's in the—" "I know where it is," I interrupted her. "All right, I'll meet you." "What time?" 7 o'clock. I won't have the kids with me, just the three of us." The conversation was short and businesslike, but there was something about Clarissa's tone that made me uneasy. Usually she spoke to me in a condescending way, with poorly concealed contempt. Today her voice sounded uncertain, almost anxious. By 7:30, I was ready to go out. I decided to dress more discreetly. Dark pants, white shirt, gray jacket. If there is a serious conversation to be had, it is better to look accordingly. The Golden Horseshoe greeted me with familiar smells and dim lights. Nicholas and Clarissa were already seated at a corner table, and I noticed how tensely they were talking among themselves. The conversation stopped instantly when I appeared. "Hey, Dad," Nicholas said, rising to meet me. "Shushum, thanks for coming." Clarissa stood up too, but there was a stiffness in her movements. She looked as impeccable as ever, an elegant navy blue suit, neat hair, skillfully applied makeup. But there was a worry in her eyes that I hadn't noticed before. "Good evening," she said dryly. "Good evening, Clarissa." We sat down at the table and the waitress came over to take our orders. I asked for coffee, Nicholas ordered a whiskey and soda, and Clarissa ordered a white wine. The atmosphere was tense. No one knew where to start the conversation. "Dad," Nicholas finally spoke, "we wanted to apologize for yesterday. Clarissa was out of sorts. She's going through a rough patch at work." "Nicholas," his wife interrupted him, "I can speak for myself." She turned to me and tried to look remorseful. "Zach, I was really wrong last night. I acted inappropriately. I apologize." The words sounded right, but there was no sincerity in them. It was a formal response, and we all knew it. "Clarissa," I said calmly, "let's not make a spectacle of ourselves. We're both adults and we can talk openly." "Talk about what?" she tensed. About what yesterday was just the logical conclusion of what had been building up for years. You can't stand me, and that's your right. But why the comedy of reconciliation? Nicholas tried to intervene, but I stopped him with a gesture. "Son, Let us sort this out between us. Clarissa finished her sip of wine and looked at me defiantly. Okay, Zach, if you want honesty, you'll get it. Yes, I don't like your constant presence in our lives. Yes, I think Nicholas spends too much time worrying about the past instead of thinking about the future. What future are you talking about? Our future. Our children's future. We're a young family. We have our own plans, our own goals. And you keep pulling us back into some nostalgia for times that are gone. Her voice was getting more and more confident. Apparently, she had decided it was time for a final explanation. And, she continued, I'm tired of hearing endless stories about your late wife. Martha was wonderful. Martha understood everything. Martha wouldn't let... You know what? Martha's gone, and we're human beings, and we need to move on. Nicholas turned pale and grabbed his wife's hand. Clarisse, stop it. No, I won't. She got up from the table, and I realized with horror that history was repeating itself. I'm sick of being silent. I'm sick of pretending. Her voice grew louder and louder, attracting the attention of the people around her. Several customers at neighboring tables began to turn in our direction. You know what I think, Zach? She continued, pointing a trembling finger at me. It's time for you to realize that your time has passed. It's time for you to stop clinging to us and find something to do when you're older. Clarissa, sit down, please, Nicholas said pleadingly. I won't. She threw his hand away. I'm tired of playing the role of loving daughter-in-law. I'm tired of pretending to enjoy the company of this old man who does nothing but keep us from building a normal family. The last phrase was heard throughout the restaurant. Now everyone was looking at us. The manager began to approach our table. I slowly stood up, feeling something inside finally breaking. Years of restraint, years of trying to mend the relationship, years of patience, all of it had crumbled under the pressure of her anger. And that's when I realized I couldn't stay silent any longer. Get out, Clarissa shouted, stepping right up to me. Get out of here, and don't you dare ruin our lives anymore. She even tried to push me toward the exit, but I stayed still. There was dead silence around us. The whole restaurant froze, waiting for the outcome. Clarissa, I said calmly, looking her straight in the eye. Before I go, I have something to tell you. She paused, apparently not expecting me to answer. By the way, I continued in the same even tone, David from Riverside sends his regards. The effect was beyond my expectations. Clarissa instantly turned pale, as if all the blood had drained from her face. Her mouth dropped open, but she made no sound. She stood as if thunderstruck, unable to utter a word. Nicholas looked first at his wife, then at me. Dad, what are you talking about? David who? But Clarissa was silent. Her eyes were wide with terror, her hands trembling. She realized that her secret was out, and that knowledge rendered her speechless. I think Clarissa will explain it all to you, son, I said, heading for the exit. The evening had been very enlightening. I walked out of the restaurant under the heavy stares of everyone, leaving behind a picture of Nicholas's utter amazement and Clarissa's deathly pallor, who still couldn't say a word. As I walked out of the restaurant into the coolness of the October evening, I felt strangely relieved, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The rain had almost stopped by this time, leaving only the damp freshness of the air and the glistening puddles on the pavement. I walked slowly to my pickup truck, not looking back at the lighted windows of the restaurant, behind which the drama I was no longer a part of was unfolding. As I got behind the wheel, I took my time starting the engine. I wanted to be quiet for a few minutes, to reflect on what had happened, to realize what I'd just done. One phrase about David from Riverside had changed everything, transformed the aggressive, self-assured Clarissa into a pale, terrified woman, speechless. It's rare to hit a target so accurately, even without aiming. Now that the adrenaline had worn off, I could think back to the day 3 weeks ago when I'd accidentally seen my sister-in-law in the company of a stranger. Back then, I'd tried to convince myself that perhaps I'd been mistaken, that the encounter had an innocent explanation. But Clarissa's reaction just dispelled any doubts. She knew exactly who I was talking about and understood what my knowledge of their meeting meant. That day started out quite ordinary. I needed special gaskets to repair the old Thompson boat, and the only store where they could be found was in Riverside. The town was a half-hour's drive from Frostburg in a picturesque valley between low hills. I always loved these trips, The road took me through beautiful countryside, past farms and woodlands that were especially beautiful in the fall. The marine gear store turned out to be just what I needed. The elderly owner, a former sailor himself, was enthusiastically discussing the finer points of repairing old engines, and we talked for almost an hour. By the time I went outside with my purchases, it was 3:30, and my stomach was insistently reminding me of itself. The Maple Leaf, a small, family-run cafe on Riverside's main street, was known for its home-cooked food and pleasant atmosphere. I'd been there before when I was in town on business. The owner, an energetic woman in her 50s, always remembered her regular customers and their preferences. Parking near the entrance, I was already anticipating their famous turkey sandwich when my eyes involuntarily fell on the window of the cafe. Sitting at one of the tables by the window was Clarissa. It was so unexpected that at first I thought I was mistaken. But no, it was definitely her. The same impeccable hair, the same style of dress, the same demeanor. Across from her sat a man I'd never seen before. Tall, with dark hair, wearing an expensive gray suit. Age, about 40, maybe a little more. His face was pleasant, without any special features, but he had the confidence of a successful man. They were talking animatedly, and it was obvious that they were both enjoying the conversation. I stopped a few steps from the entrance, not knowing what to do. Should I go in and say hello? But then I'd have to explain what I was doing in Riverside, get to know her companion, get involved in the conversation. On the other hand, pretending not to notice was weird too. She might see me through the window. As I hesitated, their conversation grew more and more animated. Clarissa was laughing, throwing her head back. She only laughed like that when she was in a good mood. The man was saying something, gesticulating vigorously, and it was obvious that he knew how to be charming. They looked like a couple of people who had known each other for a long time and felt very comfortable in each other's company. Then something happened that finally made the situation clear. Clarissa leaned across the table and put her hand on the arm of her interlocutor. The gesture was short, but very eloquent. This was neither a business meeting nor a casual friendly conversation. It was a date in the most classic sense of the word. I quietly walked away from the cafe and got back into the car. My head was spinning with the surprise of discovery. Clarissa, who at home portrayed herself as a model wife and mother, who chided Nicholas for every extra minute spent at work, who demanded full attention to her family, the same Clarissa was secretly dating another man in a neighboring town. On the drive home, I agonized over what to do with the information I'd received. Should I tell Nicholas? But I had no proof other than the scene I'd accidentally seen. Besides, my son was already worried about the strained relationship between me and his wife. Why add suspicion of infidelity to that? On the other hand, silence also seemed wrong. Nicholas had a right to know the truth about his wife's behavior. But what if I was wrong? What if that encounter had an innocent explanation that I just couldn't imagine? To accuse a man of infidelity based on one suspicious encounter would be unfair. For days I agonized over these doubts, trying to find the right solution. In the end, I decided to keep silent, hoping that either I was wrong in my suspicions or that the situation would resolve itself. Perhaps it was a single encounter, a moment of weakness that would never happen again. But deep down, I knew I was fooling myself. What I saw at the Maple Leaf was not like a chance meeting or a first date. There was an obvious intimacy between Clarissa and the stranger that spoke of a long-term relationship. They felt too free with each other, too natural looking together. Now, sitting in the car outside the restaurant after tonight's scene, I realized that knowing about this encounter was my trump card in the game Clarissa was dictating. She thought she could humiliate me with impunity, publicly insult me, demand that I disappear from the family's life. She thought she was invulnerable, protected by her role as victim and her husband's support. But one phrase about David from Riverside changed the balance of power. Now she knew I knew her secret, and that knowledge took away all her former insolence. The pallor on her face, the lost look in her eyes, the inability to utter a word, all told me that she was aware of the position she was in. The most interesting thing was that I didn't even know her lover's real name. David was a name I'd made up myself, trying to label the stranger in my mind. Just the first American name that came to mind. But Clarissa reacted as if I had named him accurately. Maybe his name really was David, or maybe she just realized that I knew the man existed, and the name wasn't important. Starting the engine at last, I drove slowly out of the restaurant parking lot. In the rearview mirror, I glimpsed the lighted windows of the establishment, where Clarissa was now having an unpleasant conversation with her husband. I wondered what she would say to him. How would she explain her reaction to the mention of David? Would she be able to get away with it? Or would the truth finally come out? But that was none of my business. I'd done what I thought was right. I'd shown Clarissa what I knew about her double life. What happened next was up to her and Nicholas. I wasn't going to meddle in their family affairs or try to prove anything anymore. The drive home seemed especially short. My mind felt surprisingly clear and calm, as if a question that had long plagued me had finally been answered. Clarissa no longer seemed like a mystery to me. She was just an ordinary woman who cheated on her husband and tried to hide it behind aggressive behavior. Nothing special, nothing unique. Just a person who chose lying over honesty. At home, I turned on all the lamps in the living room, as if the bright light could chase away the heavy thoughts that had accumulated over the past few days. Settling into Martha's favorite chair, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, a good scotch that I saved for special occasions. Tonight was definitely one of those occasions. The first sip burned my throat with a pleasant warmth, and I leaned back in my chair, staring at the family photos on the opposite wall. Martha smiled at me from those pictures, young and happy in the wedding photo, tired but content with little Nicholas in her arms, older but still loving in the last portrait of them together, taken a year before her illness. What would she have said about today's events? Most likely she would have shaken her head and remarked something like, "I told you there was something wrong with that girl." Martha had an amazing intuition about people and was almost never wrong in her assessments. She had been wary of Clarissa from the beginning, though she tried not to show it openly. "She's too calculating for her age," said the wife after her first meetings with her future daughter-in-law, "and looks upon us not as family, but as a temporary obstacle to her goals." At the time, it seemed to me that Martha was exaggerating, that her maternal jealousy of her daughter-in-law prevented her from seeing the situation objectively. Now, however, as I analyzed the past few years, I realized how accurate her observations had been. Clarissa had never really seen us as family. We were an unfortunate necessity to her, part of the package that came with Nicholas. As long as Martha had been alive, her sister-in-law had held back, realizing that open confrontation would lead to problems with her husband. But after his wife's death, the mask began to gradually fall away. At first, it was small things, barely perceptible hints that my presence in their lives was unnecessary, that it was time to think about more age-appropriate activities. Then the hints became more direct, and the tone of the conversation colder. Clarissa skillfully played on Nicholas's sense of guilt, suggesting to him that taking care of his father takes away time and energy that should belong to a young family. Gradually, the son began to call less and less often, and the visits became shorter and more formal. When I tried to talk about my own affairs, Clarissa would yawn defiantly or go into another room. If we talked about Martha, she had a look of ill-concealed irritation on her face. She did not tolerate even the mention of her mother-in-law, as if she feared that the memory of her would prevent her from finally reformulating the family relationship to her liking. Particularly painful were the moments when Clarissa used the children as a tool of pressure. "Alex is tired. He needs to go home. Emma has a big day tomorrow. Don't overexcite her," were the phrases she used whenever the grandchildren began to enjoy their time with me. It was as if she was afraid that we would develop too close a bond that would interfere with her plans to isolate me from the family. The most cynical part was that all of this manipulation was done under the guise of concern for the family's well-being. Clarissa presented herself as a defender of her husband and children's interests, as a woman who fights for her family's right to a quiet life without unnecessary people. Nicholas, tired of the constant conflicts at home, gradually began to accept her version of events. And I, not wanting to create more problems for my son, silently tolerated this slow displacement from his life. Every time I wanted to object to another hint from Clarissa, I thought of the children I didn't want to deprive of their grandfather because of adult conflicts. Every time Nicholas canceled a meeting under pressure from his wife, I found excuses. He was tired, he had a lot of work to do, family matters were more important. But patience has its limits, and today those limits were exceeded. The public humiliation in the restaurant, the demand to leave, the insults in front of strangers, all of this exceeded the limits of human dignity. Clarissa had thought she could wipe her feet on me with impunity, and she had miscalculated. A second glass of whiskey helped clear my thoughts and make a final decision. I no longer intend to participate in this game, where the rules are dictated by an aggressive and cynical woman, and her husband tacitly indulges her behavior. Enough years have been spent trying to establish a relationship with a man who fundamentally does not want this relationship. The most painful realization concerned Nicholas. My son, whom I raised, educated, in whom I put all the best that was in me. This man turned out to be a weakling, unable to protect his own father from the humiliation of his wife. He preferred a quiet life without conflict to a principled position, comfort to justice. Of course, one could find excuses for him. Family life is a complicated thing, especially when the wife is adept at manipulation and creating emotional pressure. Nicholas probably genuinely thought he was trying to keep peace in the family by making compromises. But the result of these compromises was that his father became an unwelcome guest at family events. The phone rang around 11:30. The caller ID showed Nicholas's number. He probably wanted to explain his wife's behavior, apologize for the scene at the restaurant, ask her to ignore her words. A standard set of phrases for a standard situation. But I didn't pick up the phone. The call repeated 5 minutes later, then 10 more. In all, my son tried to call 7 times in an hour, but I didn't answer. Not because I was angry or wanted to punish him. I just realized that talking now would be futile. Nicholas would try to smooth things over, to find a compromise, to talk me into Clarissa's position. And I was no longer willing to get into someone else's position at the expense of my own dignity. Around midnight, I went up to the bedroom, but sleep wouldn't come. The events of the last few years were replaying in my mind, and each episode was now seen in a new light. How Clarissa had accidentally forgotten to invite me to Alex's birthday party. How she had mixed up the time of Christmas dinner, causing me to be late for the start of the festivities. How she systematically sabotaged all my attempts to spend time with my grandchildren. None of these were accidents or the result of busyness or forgetfulness. It was a deliberate campaign to force me out of the family, conducted methodically and consistently. Clarissa wanted full control over her husband and children, and my presence was preventing her from doing so. So she was determined to get rid of the obstacle by any means necessary. But today she overestimated her abilities and underestimated mine. She thought she could afford any insult without fear of backlash. She didn't realize I might have information that would put her in a vulnerable position. The mention of David from Riverside shattered her confidence in her own invulnerability. As I fell asleep toward morning, I thought about the new events tomorrow would bring. Clarissa would probably try to explain her reaction to my words to Nicholas. Maybe she'd make up a story about David being a co-worker she'd met on a work-related matter. Or maybe she'll say I confused her with someone else. Or maybe she'll go on the offensive and accuse me of slander, try to make it look like I'm trying to destroy their marriage out of revenge for today's conflict. Women like Clarissa always have a plan of action in case of exposure. They know how to get out of the most difficult situations by shifting the blame. But it was none of my business now. I wasn't going to waste any more time and nerves trying to figure out my son's family problems. Let him decide for himself what to believe in and how to build his life. I was finally free from having to endure humiliation and pretend that everything was okay. This feeling of liberation was so pleasant that I fell asleep with a light heart for the first time in many months. The morning was clear and cool, the first rays of sunlight shining through the bedroom curtains, promising a nice fall day. I woke up with a surprisingly clear head, despite last night's whiskey and late bedtime. I went down to the kitchen, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and sat by the window with the morning paper. There was the usual silence in the house, which no longer seemed oppressively lonely, but felt like calm and peace. Around 10 in the morning, I was in the garage taking apart tools for another project when I heard the familiar sound of the engine. Nicholas's silver Jeep pulled into the driveway, and a minute later my son appeared in the garage doorway. He looked tired and anxious, with shadows under his eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. "Hi, Dad," he said quietly, hesitantly stopping in the doorway. "Good morning, Nicholas. Come on in." I continued sizing up the wrenches, showing little enthusiasm for his visit. My son made his way into the garage, carefully stepping around the parts spread out on the floor, and sat down on an old crate that served as a makeshift chair for me. "Dad, I need to talk to you about what happened yesterday." About what? I asked, not lifting my head from my work. About how your wife publicly humiliated me in the restaurant, or about how you watched in silence. Nicholas wrinkled his nose painfully, as if he'd been punched. Dad, please. I know Clarissa behaved inappropriately. She admits it herself. She's going through a very difficult time at work right now. A lot of stress. Nicholas, I interrupted him, finally raising my head and looking him straight in the eye. Let's not write off the rudeness as work stress. We're both adults, and we realize that yesterday was not the first episode. My son lowered his gaze, unable to find anything to object. He knew I was right, but to admit it out loud was to agree that the problem was more serious than he wanted to think. But Dad, she's really sorry for what she said. We had a long talk last night and… And what? I put the wrench down and turned my attention back to the conversation. What did she say to you? Nicholas hesitated, clearly not ready for a direct question. Well, she explained that she wasn't herself, that she didn't mean to hurt you, and about what you said at the end, about some guy named David. She said she didn't know what it was about. The last sentence sounded uncertain, as if Nicholas didn't really believe the explanation. I looked carefully at my son and realized that he was in a difficult position, between the desire to believe his wife and doubts that did not give him rest. Nicholas, what do you think? Did you believe her explanation? The question stumped him. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly struggling with inner contradictions. Yeah, I don't know, Dad. Clarissa has never lied to me, but her reaction to what you said was very strange. Strange is an understatement, I said. I said the name of a man she didn't know, and she turned pale and speechless. Maybe she was just frightened, didn't realize what was going on. His son's voice was desperate to find an innocent explanation for what had happened. He wanted to believe his wife, but the facts didn't fit his comfortable worldview. I got up from my squat and leaned against the workbench, looking at Nicholas with sympathy. I felt sorry for him, not anger for my son, but pity. He'd fallen into a trap he'd set for himself, choosing a woman who wasn't who she said she was. Son, I said softly, I'm not going to tell you who David of Riverside is. It's your family, your wife, and that's up to you. But I want you to understand one simple thing. I'm not going to take this kind of attitude any longer. Dad, but let me finish. I stopped him. Last night was the last straw. Years of insinuating that I'm an extra in your life, the constant attempts to minimize our communication, the humiliation, it's over. Nicholas looked more and more confused with every word I said. But Dad, we're a family. We can talk things out, find a compromise. Compromise? I grinned wryly. Son, do you realize what kind of compromise you're talking about? What am I supposed to do? Apologize to Clarissa for daring to show up at a family dinner? No, of course not, but… Or maybe I should promise not to keep you guys from having a normal family anymore. That's what she said yesterday. The words had slapped Nicholas in the face. He blushed, realizing that it was simply impossible to defend such statements of his wife. Dad, that's not what she meant. Son, stop it. She meant exactly what she said. Clarice thinks I'm a nuisance in your life, and she wants to get rid of me. I don't think that's a secret even to you. Nicholas was silent, staring at his hands folded in his lap. His posture had the hopelessness of a man who realizes that he's right, but can't do anything about it. What do you suggest? He asked quietly at last. Nothing in particular. I just want you to understand that the era of humiliation is over. If Clarissa can't tolerate my presence, there's no point in me imposing. But the children, Daddy? Think of the children. Sorana Nicholas suddenly exclaimed, as if he had just found a convincing argument. Alex and Emma love you. They'll suffer without Grandpa. This argument was painful, and Nicholas knew it well. Grandchildren were indeed my weakness, and the thought of losing them caused acute pain. Nicholas, don't speculate about the children, I said after a pause. I never gave up my time with Alex and Emma. It was your wife who systematically shortened the time we spent together. But if you and Clarissa don't find common ground, then what? She's going to stop them from seeing me? I took a good look at my son. Would you allow it? The question put Nicholas in a very uncomfortable position. He realized that any answer would look wrong. To say yes meant admitting that he was willing to sacrifice the children's relationship with their grandfather for the sake of family peace. To say no meant promising to stand up to his wife, which he apparently lacked the resolve to do. "Dad, let's not go to extremes," he said evasively. "Son, the extremes have already come. Last night when your wife demanded that I get out of the restaurant. That was the time to stand up for your father. Where were you at that moment?" Nicholas turned pale, realizing that the question was fair and painful at the same time. "I was trying to calm Clarissa." "You were trying to avoid conflict," I corrected, "and that's understandable. But the result was that I was publicly humiliated and you remained silent." "Dad, I didn't know what to do." "I do now," I said firmly. "I won't make you choose between my wife and my father anymore. You live your life, and I'll live mine." Nicholas got up from the crate and paced the garage, clearly trying to find the words to object. "But this isn't right, Dad. We're a family. We're supposed to stick together." "Family is when people respect each other and are willing to protect each other," I replied. "It's hard to call what we've been going through these past few years of family." "Sonori, give us another chance," my son asked. "I'll talk to Clarissa, explain to her." "What exactly are you going to explain to her?" I interrupted. "That it was wrong to publicly insult the elderly? That it's unseemly to demand that your father-in-law disappear from the family's life?" "Nicholas, if at 35 years of age a person does not understand such elementary things, then explanations will not help." The son stood in the middle of the garage with his hands down, a picture of utter defeat. He had come here with the hope of somehow resolving the conflict, but he had encountered a firmness he had not expected to encounter. "Dad, what if Clarissa apologized, publicly in front of everyone?" The suggestion was desperate and naive at the same time. I shook my head. "Son, an apology makes sense when a person is truly remorseful for their actions. Your wife is not remorseful. She's just in an awkward situation and is looking for a way out of it." How do you know what she's thinking?" "By her behavior. If Clarissa was truly sorry for what happened, she would have come here with you and apologized herself. Instead, she sent you alone to deal with the consequences of her behavior." The logic was irrefutable, and Nicholas understood it. He tried to find arguments for a few more minutes, but gradually realized the hopelessness of his attempts to change my position. Nicholas left around noon, without getting any promises from me to reconsider my decision. Before he left, he tried once more to press the sore point by talking about the children, about their attachment to their grandfather, about how they would suffer from the separation. But I remained firm in my position, explaining to my son the simple truth. Relationships with grandchildren should not be built through overcoming humiliation from their mother. After his departure, I returned to the garage and continued working on a new project, an antique clock that a neighbor brought in for repair. Mechanical work has always helped me get my thoughts in order, and today it was especially important. Taking apart the complex clock mechanism, I reflected on what had happened over the past few days and realized that the decision I had made was the only right one. In the evening, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I recognized the voice immediately. It was Alex. "Grandpa Zach?" "It's me, Alex. Mom said I could call you from my friend's phone." I could hear the anxiety and embarrassment in his grandson's voice. Apparently, there was a serious conversation at home about my relationship with Clarissa. "Hey, Alex, how's school going?" Fine." "Grandpa, is it true we won't be seeing you anymore?" The question was direct and painful. A 13-year-old couldn't hide his feelings behind diplomatic language. "Alex, who told you that?" "Mom was talking to Dad in the kitchen. She said you don't want to hang out with our family anymore." Classic Clarissa twist, turning the facts upside down. Now it was me giving up on my family, not her, who'd been dragging me out of my son's life for years. "Alex, listen to me carefully. I will never give up on you and Emma. You're my grandchildren and I love you very much." "But then why does Mom say that?" "That's a difficult question, Alex. Adults sometimes have disagreements with each other, but that doesn't mean the children have to suffer. Can I come visit you alone? On the weekends?" My grandson's proposal touched me to the core. The boy was ready to break the home prohibitions, just so as not to lose contact with his grandfather. "Of course, Alex. If my parents allow it, I'd be happy to do it. And if they don't?" Then we'll wait until you're old enough to make your own decisions. After talking to my grandson, I realized that the children have become hostages to adult conflict, but I can't change the situation yet. Clarissa is probably using them as a tool of pressure, telling them how Grandpa abandoned the family and doesn't want to see his grandchildren. Such manipulation was her style. The next few days passed in a quiet routine. I finished a clock for a neighbor, started restoring an old radio I found at a flea market, read books I had long put off. Life without the constant stress of waiting for another conflict with Clarissa was surprisingly pleasant. Nicholas called every day trying to find a compromise, but I gently but firmly rejected all his proposals. To meet to clarify the situation, to talk in a calm atmosphere, to give Clarissa another chance. All these options meant a return to the old scheme, where I had to suffer humiliation for the sake of preserving the appearance of family well-being. Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. Alex stood on the doorstep with a small backpack over his shoulders. He looked resolute, though there was excitement in his eyes. "Hi, Grandpa. I told my parents I was going to a friend's house, but I came to see you." "Alex, it's not nice to lie to your parents. What else am I supposed to do?" There was a bitterness in the boy's voice that sounded mature. "Mom forbade me to see you. She said you'd become evil and could be a bad influence on us." Another one of Clarissa's lies designed to appeal to child psychology. Now her version of me is not just an extra person, but a potential danger to the children. "Come in, grandson. Let's talk." We went into the living room, where the parts of a disassembled radio receiver were on the table. Alex looked at the ancient equipment with interest. "Grandpa, what is it?" "Radio 40s. I'm trying to restore it. Want to help?" We spent the next 2 hours working together. Alex turned out to be a capable assistant. He carefully handed over the tools, asked reasonable questions, and listened attentively to explanations. At such moments, I understood what it meant to be a grandfather and what Clarissa was trying to take away from me. "Grandpa," Alex said as we took a break for tea and cookies, "Mom says you're telling other people things about her that aren't true." "Sarmasin, what untruths?" "I don't know. She doesn't explain. She just says you're trying to ruin her reputation. So the David from Riverside story keeps bothering Clarice. She feels threatened and is trying to discredit me in advance." "Alex, I haven't told anyone about your mom, but adults sometimes have conflicts that children can't always understand. Will you two make up?" "I don't know, grandson. Reconciliation is not always possible." The boy nodded with the serious look of an adult beyond his years. "Grandpa, can I come to you secretly? Sometimes on weekends?" "Alex, I can't ask you to cheat on your parents, but if we ever get to meet officially, I'd be very happy to." That evening, Nicholas came to pick up his son. He looked tired and annoyed. "Dad, you can't encourage children to cheat," he said as soon as he stepped through the door. "I didn't encourage anything." Alex made the decision to come. "Clarissa is furious. She says you're turning the children against her on purpose." "Nicholas, your wife sees conspiracies where there are none. Alex just wanted to see his grandfather. That's fine. But this situation is not normal." The son was clearly on the verge of a breakdown. "The kids ask questions I don't know how to answer. Clarice demands that I forbid them to see you." "And what did you say?" "I said I'd think about it." "Son, what do you think? Should a grandfather communicate with his grandchildren?" Nicholas was silent, struggling with internal contradictions. "Of course he should, but—" "No buts, Nicholas. Either you think such communication is right or you don't." "I do." "But Clarice mustn't dictate the terms of the children's intercourse with grandfather. They're your children too." Nicholas left, taking Alex away, but I could see the struggle going on in his head. Perhaps for the first time in a long time, he was beginning to question the rightness of his wife's position. The following weeks brought relative calm. Nicholas called less often, Clarissa didn't show up at all, and the kids occasionally called from other people's phones. I didn't try to force things, realizing that the situation had to mature on its own. And it did. At the end of November, Nicholas came to me in a very depressed state. "Dad, I need advice," he said without preamble. "I'm listening." I hired a private investigator. I checked out the story on David from Riverside. My heart raced, but outwardly I remained calm. "What did you find out?" "Clarissa is indeed dating this man. For over 6 months now, they're in a committed relationship. Nicholas spoke quietly, as if every word hurt him. What are you going to do? I don't know. The kids, the house, the plans. It's all falling apart. Son, I sympathize with you, but it's your life, your choice. Dad, you were right all along. I'm sorry. There's nothing to forgive, Nicholas. You protected your family the way you thought was right. Nan, now I understand why you made that decision after that dinner at the restaurant. I just stopped letting myself be manipulated. At 72, I had to learn to protect my dignity. We sat in silence for a long time, each thinking about his own thoughts. Then Nicholas stood up. Dad, can the kids come to visit you on weekends? While I deal with this situation? Of course, son. The door to my house is always open to my grandchildren. Thank you, Dad, and I'm sorry again. After he left, I returned to my watch. The movement was almost assembled. All that remained was to adjust the balance and check the accuracy of the movement. Painstaking work, requiring patience and attention to detail. Like life, where every detail is important and haste can ruin everything. I didn't celebrate or rejoice in my son's problems. I simply accepted reality as it was. The years of humiliation were over, not because I had gotten revenge or proved myself right. They ended because I finally found the strength to say no and defend the boundaries of my own dignity.